Welcome back to Fixing Furniture. Today my project is working on a steamer trunk. Now steamer trunks are pretty common repair projects because there are a lot of steamer trunks out there available to work on, and they also make great storage in a home. Some people I've seen use these as coffee tables, add great character to a room. Other people use them as storage for linens, and that's what Lori and I are going to be doing with this one. Now this trunk is in bad shape. It's missing metal here, it's got a broken lock, it's got some missing parts, and in here it's got a lot of restoration I need to do on the inside to get rid of this moldy old smell to it. So I'm going to walk you through step by step how I work on this project, get it into a nice shape that we can use it in our home. Stick with me, I'll show you how it's done.
As a furniture repair business, we're opening the doors to our workshop to show you the tools and techniques to repair furniture.
The front rail here, you can see this has been broken off.
We give you tips to make your repair projects easier. Let's get into the workshop and start fixing furniture.
Sponsored by Kennedy Hardware, offering restoration hardware for antique furniture. Before I get working on this trunk, I want to let you know there are some steamer trunks that are worth a lot of money. A Louis Vuitton brand, for example, is something you want to preserve and not do what I'm going to do here, and that is really a modification to it. So understand the trunk you're working on before you get into it. Now this one, Laura and I purchased for $10 from a military family. This has been around the world a number of times, and the wear on it certainly looks like it. So the first thing I want to do is, there's some paint on the wood. I want to strip off that paint so I can get it back to something that I can stain. You can see here there's gray paint on this end, there's black on the other end. On the end of the trunk here, you can see the handle's broken off, so I'll have to fix that. There is some character here I want to keep. So this says Windsor Hotel. I'd like to keep that if possible. I'm going to keep these wood, but I have some paint that I need to take off the edge, so I need to mask that. And the canvas is really damaged on this chest, so the canvas is coming off. But it looks like this was Mrs. E.B. Eddy's steamer trunk, and she lived in Hull, Canada. So I'll get the paint stripper out here, we'll clean these off, and then we can flip it over to the other side. Chemical strippers work the fastest, but you need to be wearing the right PPE. This is an organic cartridge respirator to protect my lungs. I've also got the workshop door open to allow lots of ventilation. I've got gloves on to protect myself here as well. The next step is to take off the canvas. It's worn in a number of spots, and to repair the canvas, replace it all, is a tremendous amount of work. So what I'm going to be doing here is cutting it out to get it back to bare wood. I've got a fresh blade in my utility knife, but if I wanted to replace the canvas, what I'd have to do is take off the corners, take off these wood strips here, take off the metal strips, then I'd have the canvas. That would take me back to just a bare wood box, put on new canvas, then I'd have to put on these metal straps, then I'd have to put on the wood straps, then the corner straps. That's what I mean by it's a tremendous amount of work to replace the canvas. The look I'm looking for is wood on wood with metal straps, so I'm just simply going to cut this out. There's one piece that I want to hang on to, and that's this sticker here. I want to see if I can keep the stamp and reattach it to the wood. I think that's pretty cool. You can see it's starting to look a lot different now. There's a bit of a texture here from the adhesive, so I have to clean that off. But before I move on to taking any more of the canvas off, I've got some hardware here that has to be removed. So here you can see I've got a broken lock. This isn't original, so that has to come off. So it's easier to remove this before taking the canvas off, rather than cutting around it, taking it off, and having to do more work. So that means we're now moving on to the inside. So the inside of the chest has paper on it, and it all has to come off so I can access the tacks and nails. Now that might sound a little bit odd, but the nails for steamer trunks are actually longer than the wood. So I've got about a 1/2 inch of material on the outside of the steamer trunk, but the nail goes through that wood and then it's bent over, and that's how the nail stays in. So if I don't straighten the nail and then pull it back out, I could risk breaking the wood. Let's take a closer look at nails and tacks. So the nail I showed you here is 1.5 inches, it's steel, and all of this is available from Kennedy Hardware. They carry a brass plated version of this as well. They also have 1-inch versions of these nails. So these nails are meant for holding on the hardware where you need structure. This nail here is quite unique. This is a Saratoga or a Jenny Lind trunk nail. This is meant for holding on the slats. And I've got a couple of these to replace, so you see me attach that on this trunk. Here we've got 1/2 inch tacks, and here are 3/4 inch tacks, again in steel and brass plated. These tacks are meant for holding on decorative elements. So I've got some steel to replace, and I'll be using tacks to do that. I'll put links to each of these products in the video description so you can get those at Kennedy Hardware. I've also got some additional hardware pieces here I'll be using for the project. We'll get into those a little bit later. Well, now I'll peel back the paper here to see what's underneath. Sometimes this paper comes off really easily, other times you need to soak it or steam it off. As I take this off, I'm seeing 2 different layers of lining. So this is the bare wood, there's an older layer, and then a newer layer. You can see there's a color difference. If I pull this one off, looks like the older layer that's underneath is stuck on there pretty well. This top layer is coming off in chunks. I've got all the loose paper off, but I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to strip all of this paper off. Why would I do that? Well, this trunk's got a bit of a musty smell to it, and what I want to do is stop that from happening. So I'm going to take off all the paper, I'm going to seal it with shellac, and that way it won't have that smell when we store linens in here. So the question for you, how do you take this paper off of a steamer trunk? With a steamer. I love dad jokes. If you've got some, put them in the comments. If you've never used a power steamer before, they're a great tool for removing wallpaper, but also great for steamer trunks. It usually takes only about 10 seconds to steam a piece. And then what we can do is start scraping it, hold it on the next section that you're going to strip, and it takes it off. It's much faster than trying to soak this with vinegar or with warm water. You can see how it just peels right off. I've got a project coming up where I'm going to use a steamer for something a little bit different. Stay tuned and you'll see what that is. This piece of fabric here was used as a lid stay. I've got a new metal one that'll be much more durable that I'll put on after the trunk is restored. All the wood's bare now on the inside of the trunk, and that musty smell I had has now been replaced with an overwhelming smell of mothballs. So I definitely need to seal the inside of this to eliminate that smell. The next step is to remove the hardware. So now I can access the nails at the back. I'll straighten them out, pull the hardware off. So I've got two latches here that are not held on well and have the wrong hardware on them. I've got a broken lock here. I've got a latch that doesn't belong here, so that's coming off. And then I can get to stripping off the rest of the canvas. Here's a bent nail here. So what I want to do is work at the tip, straighten it out, and I can pull it out the front. The nail I straightened out was this Saratoga trunk nail, so I can now pry that out. Sometimes you can reuse the nails, but this one's really beat up. It's also the wrong nail for this hardware. This is what you should be using to fasten hardware. It's much more robust. This lock here has a mix of nails in it, and this has got some rivets on, so I'll need to cut those off. And then we can get to the canvas. I've got all the canvas off the front now, but what it's revealed is down here I can see the ends of the boards at the bottom. So I'm going to have to deal with that somehow because that doesn't look good. Now on the ends here, I'm going to turn my attention to the handles. The leather here has rotted off. I have replacement handles here, but they need to go inside this post. So I need to take off 3 nails here, pull that off. I can put the new handle back in. So I'll take that off. We'll take off the canvas here and get that ready. On this end of the chest, it's very easy to see the 3 nails that have been bent over. And the tool that I use for this is called a mini cat's paw. It's meant for digging into wood and being able to pry out nails. I'll leave a link to this in the video description. So this is what's called a trunk handle loop. I'll bring it up close, we'll take a look at it. This shows me what the original leather looked like. So that's the color match that I'll be doing on the leather. And Kennedy Hardware has a bunch of these different styles if you need to replace some on your trunk. With the 2 handle loops off, I can now take off the canvas. But before I do that, I want to show you the construction here and how this went together. The construction of a trunk is with very thin material. So you can see this board ends here. This one is just nailed on. Now this is a joint that might easily come apart. So the next part here is a metal corner. And so with tacks all the way along each side here, it prevents that corner from coming apart. So before that's installed, the waterproofing is put on with a canvas. So it's the wood, the canvas, and then the corner. And after that, we've got the slats. So the slats are adding reinforcement. And on the corner here, we've got slat clamps. That's the name of this hardware. So that's the basic construction of a steamer trunk. I've got some 26 gauge metal here that I'll be using for the corner, so I've got a bit of metal work to do. But first, I'll take off the rest of the canvas. As I'm peeling off the canvas, you can just see how deteriorated it is right here. I don't know if that's rot or wear, but it's just falling apart. The worst part is here on the back. You can see there's pieces missing. There are a couple areas here that someone has tried to patch. Actually, a couple patches. The hinges seem to be attached pretty well, except for this one spot here is missing a nail. So I'm just going to cut around the hinge to take the canvas off. As I'm stripping the canvas off the back here, you can see how loose this slat is. And if we look close, you can see the nails pulled right through. This one's still intact, but they're the wrong nails used for these. So we need to be using a Saratoga nail. You see how large that head is? There's no chance that that's going to pull through. So this really is an important part of the structure. By taking the lining off of the inside and the canvas on the outside, I can see where there's damaged wood. You can see here, as I pull this off, I've got a split piece of wood here. So I need to do some wood repair here. I need to do some metal repair. Let's get to it. There are a couple of wood breaks around this chest. This is just one of them. And because it's difficult to clamp in the middle of the chest, what I'm going to do is use epoxy, because epoxy will hold when there's a slight void. That way I'm going to get a rock solid piece of wood and this chest will be solid. With all the epoxy put on here, now what I can do is move on to the metalwork. So I've got some tacks here I need to pull out. I'll cut this piece, shape it. I also need to trim off some of the metal here. So I'll work through that, and then we can get to looking at what I'm going to do at the base here. If you're in need for replacement slats, Kennedy Hardware carries these. Now they're 2 1/4, and I think this is actually a good solution for the problem I've got here at the bottom. I've got all this exposed wood here that was previously covered off by the canvas. You can see on this side it's been covered off by metal. That's probably a functional thing. On this side here, if I rip this down to 1.5 inches, the same as this slat, I think it will form a pretty consistent look. I've got these trunk corners that are going on, so that'll transition it well. And by having this wood on the finished edge here, it's matching the exact detail that's on the lid of the trunk. I'll cut down the slats once the glue's dried and I can take the clamps off. But in the meantime, I need to prepare these areas for stain. They've got a little bit of adhesive on it, and I just need to scrape them off. The wood here is pretty rough from the adhesive that was used for the canvas, but if you use a paint scraper, it comes off very easily. So it's much smoother right there than it is there. So this will be quick work. Once I've gone over it with a scraper, I'll just use 120 sandpaper, go over it one more time, and then I'll get it smooth and ready for the stain. So I've cleaned off one section here, but I realized I was a little too quick in taking the canvas off. What I should have done is cleaned off these rungs first. So I'm going to use just warm soap and water. This is the mildest cleaner you can use on wood. Now, using dish soap and water might seem like a pretty simple thing, but it's amazing how much dirt you can get off of wood when you do this. So see how light that's coming? So I'll work across these, and then we'll get the clean off the glue. After washing all the slats, this is the dirt that came off them. So the next step here is to scrape off the old adhesive. I've already done this one here. You can see the color difference, and I'll show you the steps I go through to do this. The first one is a wide scraper, and I follow up with a narrow scraper. So the wide scraper takes off the bulk of the mess here. That's it. Now I use a smaller scraper here because it can get into the areas that the wider one won't. But you can actually, if you listen to it, you can hear the sound difference of when it's scraping something off and when it isn't. So right here you can hear it scraping differently. Again, down here I can hear it coming off. So that's the small scraper, and the last is 120 sandpaper. This is just to get it ready for the stain. So we've got it nice and smooth. And that adhesive that's on there is all taken off so that it won't interfere with the finish. Now, a tip for you, scrapers, sometimes people get frustrated with them because they get dull. But there's a quick way that you can sharpen these. The cutting edge of a scraper is on the inside here, and there's a bevel on the front. So what we want to do is sharpen that edge. And you can do that with a fine file. The technique I use is you need to push it forward, but you also need to move it sideways. So I push it forward while putting it across the blade. The key is making sure you get that angle right. So I'll match the angle here, and then sharpen it. So that gives you a renewed edge there for your cutting. The key is to make sure you keep that at the constant angle. If you're doing this and this, you'll end up rounding the edge and it won't get sharp on you. I'm ready to start applying the stain, and I think what I want to do is have these panels lighter than the slats. So I'm going to stain these first, but I might end up staining all of them the same color, but let's see how this works. Now I'm using a very fine brush here because I want to control where the stain is going. So I'll just get it into the corners around the slats first, and then apply the stain to the body. Well, this is looking a little bit too orange for what I was going for. So what I'm going to do is put a darker stain on top. Because the stain is still somewhat wet, this will be lighter, but I'm going to put the dark stain on this as well, and we'll get a nice, rich, warm look here. Well, that was looking a little bit too dark, so I'll try a medium stain here, and we'll see what this looks like. This is more of a brown tone, less of a black. I think that's closer to what we're looking for. The nice thing about working with acrylic stains is you can apply water and you can take back the color. You don't get it all the way off, but it certainly gets you to a point where you can reapply the next coat of stain that you want in the right color. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the stain across all the surfaces now. And then I'll come back after a few minutes and wipe off the excess. Now, what's happening is, because the slats don't have any stain on them yet, they're accepting more stain color than what the panels are. So the panels are still wet from the stain. So it is going to give me a slightly differentiated look, which is good. That's what I'm looking for. And all the stain is going on the metal. It'll wipe off in just a few minutes. So I think I'll do one section at a time here, wipe it off, and then move on to the next section. I'm much happier with the stain, so I now have a plan of attack for that. I can't stain the whole thing right now because it's clamped up, but overnight I'll let the glue dry, take the clamps off, stain the rest of it, and then we'll get working on the inside and sealing it. So one of the challenges I've got is making this new metal look like the old metal. So I beat it up here so it's pretty rough. Now I have to wash this off to get off any oils, and then I want to tarnish it. And I'm going to use the brass ager from Kennedy Hardware to help me do part of that process. So I'm going to clean it off with vinegar. Sometimes when you buy metals, they've got a little bit of oil residue on them. It just prevents them from rusting. And I actually am looking to tarnish the metal. So I need to get off all of that so that the next couple of steps will work properly. Now I've got some superfine steel wool, I'm just going to scuff this all up and get rid of some of that shine that's on there. And you can see down here, I've got a lot of tarnishing happening on the corners. So I need to focus on that area, less so on the rest here. So I'll get my gloves on and we'll use the brass ager. So I just folded up a paper towel here to act as my applicator. I'll get a little bit of the brass ager on it. And this takes time to work. So we're just going to rub this on the corner here and let it sit 5 or 10 minutes. And we'll see what the tarnishing process looks like. You can see it already starting to turn. So as this gets darker and darker, what I want to do is slow the process, and I'll have to wipe it. So I just have to sit here and watch it till it gets to the tone that I'm happy with, and then wipe it off. Well, that certainly helped tarnish the metal, but what's going on here is much deeper than that. So what I need to do is color this. I'm going to be using shellac and some aniline dyes. So just using some garnet shellac. I don't need a whole lot here, but what I'll do is pick up some color here. I'm looking for a pretty dark brown color. But what we're doing is just dissolving the dye. You can see here it's starting to develop a darker color. What I'm looking to do is mimic the same color that's in the corner of the metal on the sections below. So this is pretty thin. Just need to get a little more intensity of color in here. And we'll give it a try. So I'm going to use a dry brushing technique, so I want to dab off the excess here. And we'll just start adding this in here and see how this looks. Now shellac dries extremely quickly, so just give this a minute and then come back and add some more to it. So just work my way up the corner here, and I'll come back and do a second coat. So if you look at how dark it is here, we are getting closer on this metal, but not quite there. So I need to add some black to the color. I also need to color in some of these imperfections, and I need a little bit of a golden tone here, so I'll put some garnet shellac on this as well. That'll hopefully get that blended in. Shellac is naturally glossy, so what I need to do is use some 4/0 steel wool, knock that back, and hopefully from a distance, no one will know that this is a new piece of metal. Now, while I've got my dyes out, what I'm going to do is dye these handles. This is the old color here, so I think I've chosen something that's fairly close. I'm just putting some denatured alcohol in a container, and that will dissolve the dye. I just need to pick some up here. Grab a little bit more. See what it looks like on the back. It's a little bit dark, but it also does absorb fast in the back. Just grab another color. So I've added a little bit of yellow in here, but it's not shifting the color the way I like it. So I'm going to grab a little bit of this reddish tone. Let's see what that looks like. A little bit muddy. Might have to start over again. Let's see. That's not getting me where I want. So I shouldn't have added the yellow in there. I'll just get rid of this, start over, and try to shift that color the way I want. Okay, I'll try this again. Denatured alcohol. Get that wet. I'm going to pull in some of this redder tone. But that, you can see, is really red. So I'm going to tone it down with the brown. Let's see what that looks like. Not too bad. Let me put it next to the trunk. We'll take a look. So here, it's almost there. I think a little bit more brown. I don't want it to exactly match, but this was a little bit too dark, and that was definitely too yellow. Okay, I've got my color here, so it's time to dye the leather. I have to dye the back of these handles too, because I think they might be visible at some point when you pull up the handle. So better safe than sorry. I just need to apply some oil to the leather handles, and I'm ready to move on to the hardware. Now the hardware I'm putting on is a brand new lock. The previous one was broken, and the latches need to be reattached. We've got some Saratoga nails to put in the back, and I did think I wanted to put on these corners with a slat in the bottom, but now that I see there isn't a contrast in the wood color, I don't think this looks bad at all. It's not noticeable. So I'm not going to proceed with that, but let me get this oil up, and then we'll start hammering some nails. There's a number of different oils you can use on leather. I'm using boiled linseed oil here. Just rub it on, let it soak in, and we're good to go. Just a word of caution, if you ball up an oily rag and leave it, it will self-combust and start on fire. So you need to make sure that you lay these out flat, let them dry before you dispose of them. Now let's install these Saratoga nails. I'll roll the trunk forward here. And we've already got 2 nails missing, so this just needs to go in the hole of the previous one. Now, as I said before, what happens here is this is going through the wood, so I have to push this down at the same time as bending it on the inside. So I need something to prop this up so that I can nail it in from the inside. So I'll get a few boards, turn this over, and then I can bend the nail. So here's the tip of the nail. Just hammer this down, make sure I've got the nail as tight as possible, and then bend it over. Now, if you need to bend it over more, you can use a nail set. And, oops, I went beside it. And that will just punch it in just a little bit further. So we want that to be smooth because we're going to be putting a lining on this. We don't want bumps in it. I'll now unbend these next 2 nails here so I can replace them with the proper fasteners. These are the ones that are put in with nails, not Saratoga nails. There. Now that looks much better. Now I can mount the hardware on the front. These latches already have holes, so I just need to line those up, and then I can drive in the nails and bend them over. With both latches on, now I can line up the lock and install it over this old opening here. So it looks like there's a couple of holes here that will line up. This one here is one, and there's another one up here. So if I use those as my starting points, I have to drill holes through the steel here to get those ones in, and then I'll drill pilot holes to start the other ones at the bottom. Okay, let's give this lock a test. So I'll do up the latches first. There we go. Nice and secure. And I've got a key here. Unlocks. Well, that's interesting. So you can lock it with this lock, and then you've also got a loop here you can put another lock on. That's pretty cool. Now we're almost at the finish line. The last thing I'm going to do on this project is wax the whole trunk with a dark wax. That'll give it a nice smooth finish and give it a little bit of a sheen. Now I do have to put the trunk liner in, but before I do that, I've got the handles to put on. So I'm going to show you a technique that I've only read about, haven't done, and that's using a heavy piece of metal to nail into to curl the nail. And then we also need to tarnish the heads of the nails so they don't look brand new. Let's get to it. So here's what I've read about. If you were to take a nail like this and nail it through something with a piece of metal at the back, because the nail is smaller at the tip than in the body, it starts to curl. And what that will do, instead of just folding the nail, it will curl it around and point it back in. It's supposed to give a superior hold, so let's give it a try on these handles. The handle goes on here, and the handle loop has a post. So this post goes into the wood. So I just need to put the handle on like this, put the post in the hole, and now I can nail on the handle loop. So I'll just put this other nail in here to hold it in place. And let's see how this works. So here's the nail where it came out and it bent over, and the tip is actually buried in the wood. So it does work better than just folding it over. There's a nail in this latch that I folded over, and you can see it's a little bit loose here. I'm going to try the same technique and see if it helps. Look at that, it tightened it right up. Let's take a look at the inside. And here's the nail, folded over, nice and flush. That's definitely the better way to do it. I'm starting to get the feel for it now. It's some sharp taps versus small hammering that seems to be doing this. There we go. That's good and strong. I'd read about this nailing technique, but it just didn't make sense to me. But now that I've seen it in action, this is the superior way to get those nails to hold in nice and tight. The next step is I've got a couple Saratoga nails here that are broken. I've got some that I've salvaged that I've taken off. I'll replace those, and then what we'll do is we'll line the trunk. The only two nail heads on all the trunk that are damaged are the ones right here on this back edge and the one right here on the front edge. I guess they were just too close and they got damaged in shipping. So I'll pull those out and replace them. Now that I'm done with all the nailing work, I can line the trunk. Now traditionally trunks are lined with paper that's put on with wallpaper paste. It does get kind of messy, and there is an easier way. Kennedy Hardware sells this adhesive back paper, and that's what I'm going to be using here. Now when choosing a paper, if the trunk was for a woman, it would typically be a very floral decorative design, and it was for a man, it would be very plain. Laura and I have chosen one here that's sort of middle of the ground. So what I'll do is get the trunk off the workbench, measure some pieces, we'll cut them up, and then we'll start putting the liner in. And this is much easier to move now that it has handles. So I've got a self-healing mat here, and this helps for a couple of reasons. One is it doesn't dull the blade of the knife, but also I've got grid lines here so I can tell that I'm cutting this square. So I've measured the bottom of the trunk, and I'm going to cut it just about an inch longer because it's going to come up the sides a bit. So I just lay out my measuring tape, get this to the edge of the bench, and that gives me a guide for cutting. So now I just line it up on the grid pattern here. My cut line, I line up on the grid pattern here, and I now got a square cut. I need 2 of these pieces, so I'll cut another one, and then we'll start installing it. So here are my 2 pieces here. There's enough just for a little bit of overlap. Now it's important if you're using adhesive back paper like this to make sure that you've got a sealed surface. I've got 2 coats of shellac. One between the first and second coat I've sanded it so it's nice and smooth. If you've got a rough surface, this paper won't hold up over time. So make sure you've got it sealed and it's smooth and you're good to go. I've peeled back the paper here to start, and what I want to do is line it up in the location I want, and then progressively peel back the backing. So as I said, I've got a little extra here that's going to go up the back. And then I'll peel this off and press it down. Now, one thing that I'm avoiding is pushing down the paper too much. Because there are nails under here, you can push so hard that you end up tearing the paper. So I've got this pad that I use on a table saw. It's foam padding. It's good for just sticking it down. I'll just use my ruler here to put a crease in the paper so this lip will sit on the bottom and cover up the bottom corner. Now I flip the paper over, you can see the crease here, and what I want to do is just take the backing off on this bottom section first, and then what I can do is take it off this section here once I get this in the right placement inside the trunk. Okay, so that's roughly the right spot. I need to make sure the paper is flat now. Okay, so this is the part here where I'll get wrinkles if I don't work from the center out. So the paper is pretty robust. I just need to work it into the corner gently here, and then work it down to the bottom, and we'll be good to go. I'll now measure for the side here, and do the same thing on the sides, and then we'll work on the second layer coming up. Now in this next row, when we get up here, the paper is going to go this way, and this piece of paper is going to go this way, so we've got a void in the corner. So we need to put a small piece here, and if you're having a challenge peeling back the paper, it's just a matter of taking a sharp blade, just sticking it in the paper itself, and then you can peel it back. So I'll stick this on here, and that will act as the point where these papers can intersect, and then I'll cover off. I'll just miter it here and fold it down. Now for the top row paper, I don't need a full width, and I can save this width for the lid. So I rip off a piece here, but I still leave a little bit of excess so that I can trim it at the end. Now on this piece, what I want to do is have a little bit overlap the top, because I'm going to trim it right on this corner here. So the trick is to get it lined up. I find this the trickier one, and then stick it down. So right there should do it. Now, the key is to make sure that this part stays flat. So I'll stick this down here, and then work my way out. So with this side and this side stuck down, I can now carefully take my knife, cut that corner, and then fold this down. So I'll fold this over now, the back of the trunk, and then I just need to trim that back. With the liner complete, I can now put the lid stay in. This is a safety device to make sure that lid isn't going to fall on someone. I'll put this on, I'll tarnish the nails, we'll put on a dark coat of wax, and take a look at the final project. This $10 steamer trunk now has a brand new lease on life. Lori and I will be using this for years to come, and it might even become a family heirloom. Now, I hope this has inspired you to take on a project like this. There are lots of resources in the video description, so be sure to check those out. Now, for those of you that have been watching Fixing Furniture for a while, you understand that I work in a fairly small workshop, and Lori and I have been trying to find a way to expand the workshop, find a bigger workshop. We're getting close, but we don't have anything we can publicly share yet. So if you want to sign up for our newsletter on fixingfurniture.com, we'll let you know when we can share those details. We're pretty excited about it. Now, the next video is a chair that has a broken back on it, and this is difficult to repair because of the curved parts in it. So be sure to subscribe to our channel, click on the bell notification so that way you get notified when this video comes out. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'll read your comments. Please put them in there. Thank you for watching Fixing Furniture.